Alright, so I just finished a game of Objective Shreveport. This is on the Red River campaign. It's from Hollandspiele Games, designed by John Tyson, I think it is. It's either Thiessen or Tyson. I feel like I heard Tom Russell pronounce the name at one point, and he said Tyson, but I could be just completely imagining that. Um, the game that I just finished, you can see here, it's a fairly sparse map. There's not a lot of terrain. The key terrain on the map you'll find are going to be the rivers, and that's really ultimately what it comes down to in terms of the Union trying to reach objective points and the Confederates preventing them from doing so. The rivers are going to kind of come into factor. It's going to be a game of movement. I ended up with a tie game. Each side had 3 victory points. Not a lot of attacking in this game, but probably because I wasn't completely familiar with exactly how the combat would work, and so I hesitated to attack and did a lot more maneuvering, especially with the Confederates. It was a matter of trying to make it as difficult as possible for the Union, particularly for Steele's troops here, to get across these rivers and advance on Washington. Down here, a little bit less so because of the fleet. It gives the Union much greater flexibility in terms of which side of the Red River they can kind of start on. The hindrance for the Union is Banks's languid, slow start. He can't move until turn 6. His forces can't move until turn 3. Porter's fleet here, which is, you see it's adjacent to the river, it's actually on the river. It can carry Smith up the river and allow him to jump off on whatever side of the Red River that he wants to. And then you've got Taylor's forces to try and stymie the Union advance. And what happened is the Union slowly went up the Red River, eventually attacked Shreveport, and actually got a fairly lucky result because Shreveport's fortified, and so you get to roll on the fortification table, which means that there's a very good chance that if you're forced to retreat, or if you get a retreat result in a fortification, that you won't have to retreat. Unfortunately, the Confederates didn't get that. They get the bad roll on the defensive works table, which is a 1, and then a fortification. They had defender casualty -1 SP, but the result was a DR. That means they weren't able to ignore that DR, so they had to retreat out of Shreveport, ceding it to the Union. So Smith, actually Banks and Smith moved in there. But as you can see, Banks ended up leaving. I left Smith there to get the extra victory point at the end of the game. They moved in there on turn 10, I believe, which gave them a victory point. And then they get another victory point for hanging on to it through turns 15 plus. Problem is, as you can see, Taylor came down here and grabbed Alexandria, and if the Union doesn't have anybody in Alexandria at the end of the game, that's 3 victory points to the Confederates. So it would have been a Union victory otherwise had Banks not let Taylor take Alexandria. And the problem was, Banks is not who you want to have going up against Taylor. I didn't look at this until it was too late, and I'd already moved Banks all the way down there on the fleet retreat. You want to move Smith. If Taylor gets around behind you and threatens Alexandria, you want to have Smith facing off against Taylor. Banks facing off against Taylor means the Union troops cannot do anything because it's going to be a 2-to-1. It's going to be a 2-column shift. So if you're at 1-to-1, like Banks was against Taylor, now you're at 1-to-3, and if you see on the 1-to-3 chart, the attacker can't actually do anything. It's either no result or something bad happens to the attacker. So you never want to be attacking in the hole like that. If Banks had more troops, he might have been able to shift it up far enough for it to work for him, but he didn't have enough. Taylor had all the guys that the Confederates had on this side of the Red River. The rest were up here with Price. He had 4 guys at the end, plus Marmaduke was with him. Down here you can see Banks had taken a number of casualties. He had something like 12 or 13 guys when he started out, and a couple futile attacks later he was reduced. So it's tough for the Union to move, to accomplish their goals unless you get some lucky die rolls, or you kind of outfox the Confederates on movement. And so we got lucky to take Shreveport, but you can't leave. I had a garrison. There's a 5-point garrison in Alexandria, and they were entrenched. And you would think that would have helped them, but no. I rolled a no effect in the defensive works table, and it was defender eliminated because Taylor came in at like a 2-to-1, a 2-shift leadership advantage. So that put him at like a 4-to-1 or 5-to-1, and rolled a 1. It's defender eliminated. So goodbye, Alexandria garrison. Hello, 3 victory points for the Confederates. And I think the Confederates would want to try and do that. If they can't hold on to Shreveport, if they lose Shreveport earlier in the game, kind of dither around up there and then bolt for Alexandria, and see if you can get lucky. I ended up saving my strategic movement card, which allowed Taylor to move double, and then I also used a force march with him. I had hung on to those cards from early in the game, and so it allowed me to bolt down here to Alexandria before the Union could get guys in place to respond. So I'll be back in a minute. This is just a recap of the game. I'll be back in a minute with a review of the system and the game. Okay. Objective Shreveport. This is game number 19 from the Hollandspiele Games collection. It is the second game in the system. Started with More Aggressive Attitudes, which was the 1862 Virginia campaign. This is the Red River campaign in 1864. Yeah. And it's interesting, it describes it here, designer John Tyson. I think it's Tyson. I could be wrong. Tom Russell can correct me if I'm wrong. But he's got it described as another compact operational sandbox for ACW gamers to play around in. While the game has some similarities to his More Aggressive Attitudes, important differences in scale and emphasis result in a unique experience that's specific to the factors that doomed the Union's 1864 Red River campaign. Well, as you saw in my recap of the game, the Union effort wasn't exactly doomed. He ended up with a tie game, but it was not easy. The Union has this difficult task of trying to get a number of objectives, and all the Confederates really have to do is prevent them from doing that, and or capitalize if the Union gets so creative with their moving they find themselves caught out of position, which is what happened with the Confederates taking Alexandria. Kind of on a lucky roll more than anything else. Getting a defender eliminated destroyed a 5-point stack of units, 5-point stack of the garrison in Alexandria, which was pretty devastating. So, it can come down to die rolls, and this one certainly did. What I like about these, Shreveport had the same feel to me in terms of map as More Aggressive Attitudes did, and the map is very sparse. There's not really any terrain that you have to worry about, and I think there's even less in the More Aggressive Attitudes map. There might be some more mountains and gaps and stuff because you've got the Shenandoah Valley in there. Here you're not. There's some mountains in the north of the map, but there's not realistically anybody's ever going to come into contact with those if you're focused on the particular objectives. But it's all rivers. It all comes down to the rivers, and the Confederates have fewer forces, as Confederates usually do, but they have this opportunity to position themselves at river crossings and make the Union have to potentially fight, 1-to-1 attacks, which aren't always good. And the 1-to-1 table is actually pretty decent for the attacker in this. I think that's a 1 in 3 chance of the attacker forcing some kind of result on the defender. What I ended up doing with the Confederates in the north is you're trying to prevent Steele, who's the Union commander up in the northern portion of the map. You're really trying to prevent him from getting to Washington, which gets the Confederates or gets the Union a victory point if they can occupy Washington, Arkansas, and you're trying to just delay, and if the Union does end up taking Washington, then you kind of play for time in the latter half of the game, because Steele, on the last few turns of the game, his guys are essentially run out of supply, and so they attack at half strength if they're not within like adjacent to or a certain number of hexes of Pine Bluff or Little Rock, which are the 2 cities in the northeastern corner of the map. Losing my voice. So you want to delay as much as you can up there, and then if you can, as what happened in my game was Steele ended up being able to take Washington, because he was able to maneuver the Confederates out of position and was able to take Washington. And then I started retreating him back. Once you get the victory point for Washington, there's no reason to stay there. So I just started retreating him back to Little Rock, where he would be within range and not have to worry about the halves and being out of supply and what have you. And unfortunately for the Confederates, when they lost Washington, that disrupted Price's units, and it took like 4 turns for me to undisrupt him. I just kept rolling 5s and 6s. So he was kind of knocked out for the last half. Otherwise, ordinarily you would take his units and harry Steele's troops on the way back with your event cards, which allow you to do these cavalry pick off strength points with your card if you can get your cavalry adjacent to Steele's forces. But I wasn't really able to do that. So the North didn't really work out for the Confederacy. It was in the South where it really worked out. And the river, the sort of chess game, it was almost like a tile puzzle in a way, where you're just shifting guys and then shifting them, to try and prevent the Union from getting the right number of movement points to get across a river. And either you put them up against a river so they'd have to attack across the river, or you put them just enough movement points away that they can't get to you. So it becomes this kind of puzzle in the north, and I felt that more in the northern part of the map than I did in the Red River section of the map, because the fleet for the Union messes things up for the Confederates on that regard. So it felt very much there like just a consolidate as much as I could of Taylor's forces that he had down there, and either try and slow the Union advance, or just fall back into Shreveport and force the Union to assault you there, because Shreveport is fortified, so they'll double Taylor's troop strength. So I ended up doing that, and when I attacked, I got like the good column, because I attacked with multiple hexes, with not Steele, but Smith attacking from one hex and Banks attacking from another, and I got the good column shift for the coordinated attack, and then the same thing happened there. I rolled a 1 on the fortifications, the fortification roll for Taylor, so he had to retreat out of Shreveport, and so that lost the Confederate Shreveport. But it only cost him 1 victory point because I didn't do it until turn 10. If you can do it in the first 7 turns, and I don't know how you would unless Taylor is running off to the south and has left it totally ungarrisoned for Smith to get his troops up there and attack it, because you're not going to get there with Banks by turn 7. He can't even leave Alexandria until turn 6. So you would have to do it with Smith. And you can get up there with the fleet. You can play the fleet cards and then do a forced march with Smith and get up there pretty quickly, but you don't have very many troops with Smith. I think you get seven troops with Smith, potentially against 4. If just the garrison in Shreveport, you'd be against 4 because the garrison would be doubled. So it's a tough row to hoe if you're trying to do Shreveport in the first 7 turns for that 2 victory point swing. But the disaster for the Union is to give up Alexandria, and that was what happened. Once I got booted out of Shreveport and the Union collected those points, I thought, well, Taylor's not going to... I have to get him back across the river for starters because he retreated across the Red River. I'd have to get him back across the river and then try and hit a fortified Shreveport. Like, retaking it with the Confederates didn't seem likely to me, so I thought, well, it's the only other thing they can do is go after Alexandria. And so I did a force march. I hung out on my force march card with Taylor, and then did a strategic movement, which allows him to double his move to bolt down to Alexandria and do... I think it was on the second... I attacked it twice. It was on the second attack that I was able to take Alexandria before Banks could get down there. And then I realized I shouldn't have sent Banks because he's worthless against Taylor. So that was my mistake for the Union, was not... Because I did get down there, was able to attack and try and retake the city. I would have had 2 chances before the game ended to retake Alexandria, and had I had Smith down there, I would have had a good chance of doing that, but not with Banks. So it ended up a tie game. So you don't have not shell game, but the tile puzzle type situation. Not quite as much in the South. You can do that a little bit, just in terms of, because the Union has 2 to the Confederates 1, unless you want to split the Confederate forces more, but you only have the 1 leader with Taylor in the southern portion of the map for the Confederates, and so that's a little harder to do that catch out. That's like the Union has the advantage down there with multiple columns. So you just try and do like where you try and kind of keep the Union either pinned up against the river, or you can try and draw them out, because maybe if you split your forces as the Confederates, that might be one way to do it, is to try and draw the Union out to try and pick off smaller wings of the Confederate forces. But I just kind of did a monster stack for Taylor and advanced out, and then advanced back as the Union, as Banks came up the river. So, and then just fell back on Shreveport. I'm not sure how else to do it. It would take some more exploration to ultimately figure that out. But in terms of how it compares to more aggressive attitudes, I liked it a little bit better, I think, just because I felt like there was more of a puzzle, more aggressive attitudes. And again, I didn't play that a whole lot either. I played it, I think, once or twice, and it was there. It felt much more like the Confederates were always just retreating to avoid a major combat. Whereas here, you don't necessarily want to avoid combat, but you want to make it unpleasant for the Union. And I felt like you could do that more here in this title. So it felt like a little more refined to me. The combat, though, very simple, and it's a very light treatment. So it's operational, and people think, oh, operational supply and blah blah blah. No, it's very very simple system. Movement's very simple. You're looking at 6 pages of rules, the charts on the back. So it's very, 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 very easy, very, very quick. Plays very, very quick. And component-wise, it's what we've come to expect from Hollandspiele, which is usually pretty good. Sometimes, as is the case with any of these sort of self-published, or not, self-published, but through a publisher that does these small print runs, like Blue Panther, who I think is their printer for the Hollandspiele titles. Sometimes you'll get some little counter sheets will be a little off, or they'll be a little blurry. Some of them that I've seen before, like on the back side, they're a little bit blurry, which I think something that Tom has said he's been working on with Blue Panther to try and address. But the map was better in this game than it was in More Aggressive Attitudes. I had mentioned More Aggressive Attitudes, the turn track and data tracks and stuff were not adequately sized enough to handle the laser cut counters. Here, the turn track and everything was perfectly sized, easy to read, easy to move your counters about on and stuff. And then the setup sheets for each side are nice. I like having the off-map boxes. That's good, so you don't have to constantly shift through stacks. You can just kind of look at everything as it's laid out at a glance. So slightly improved components on this one as opposed to more aggressive attitudes. So yeah, overall, I think it's worth taking a look at if you like a light sort of puzzly treatment of an operational Civil War campaign. I also like it because it's kind of the system has two lesser known. You're not getting, there's not a lot of treatments of the Red River campaign out there. There's an old FPI title, that may be it. So it's maybe not gamed a whole lot because of the futility of like who wants to game a situation where Nathaniel Banks is in charge of your Union forces. But they made this interesting that there is a puzzle aspect to it. It's about maneuver, and that's what the operational level should be about. It should be about maneuver and getting your guys in position, or making your guys making your opponent make difficult choices about where and whom he wants to attack. And so that's kind of what I enjoyed about both of these games that I've played so far. So I look forward to see if there's more campaigns that John can get out of the Civil War. Maybe some more of these lesser known campaigns that have that same sort of cool puzzly aspect of making your opponents make hard choices. So I look forward to seeing those in the future.